This is the channel Learn History While You Sleep. Here, you'll find immersive, softly narrated stories from ancient civilizations, medieval empires, and forgotten corners of history, all told in a calming tone designed to help you relax, unwind, and fall asleep. Each episode is crafted to blend education with rest, transforming bedtime into a gateway to the ancient world. New videos weekly. Topics: Rome, Greece, Egypt, medieval Europe, lost empires, and more. Let history guide you into dreams. Subscribe and start your journey through time while you sleep.
In the quiet corners of medieval Europe, whispers of heresy had long unsettled the powerful. But in one kingdom, newly united, fiercely devout, and politically ambitious, those whispers would ignite a firestorm. This is the story of how the Spanish Inquisition began. To understand the Spanish Inquisition, we must begin with the unification of Spain. In 1469, the marriage of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile marked a turning point. It wasn't just a political alliance, it was the foundation of a united Spain under a single monarchy and a shared vision deeply tied to Catholic orthodoxy. But Spain was far from homogeneous. It was a land shaped by centuries of coexistence and conflict between Christians, Muslims, and Jews. For over 700 years, the Iberian Peninsula had been a complex mosaic of cultures, especially during the time of Al-Andalus, the Muslim-ruled territories. In cities like Toledo, Cordoba, and Granada, scholars of all faiths exchanged ideas, translating Greek, Arabic, and Latin texts. This cultural symbiosis, however, was not destined to last. By the late 15th century, the Reconquista, the centuries-long Christian campaign to retake territory from Muslim rule, was in its final stages. In 1492, the Kingdom of Granada fell, marking the symbolic end of Muslim political power in Spain. But military victory wasn't enough for the Catholic monarchs. They envisioned not just political unity, but religious purity. This vision led to suspicion of two groups in particular: Muslims and Jews, especially those who had converted to Christianity. These converts were known as Moriscos, former Muslims, and conversos, or new Christians, former Jews. Many conversos had integrated into Christian society, even rising to positions of wealth, education, and influence. But their success bred resentment. Some old Christians doubted the sincerity of their conversions, suspecting them of secretly practicing their former faiths, a crime known as crypto-Judaism or crypto-Islam. Ferdinand and Isabella, motivated by both genuine religious zeal and political pragmatism, feared internal division. So they turned to an institution with terrifying power: the Inquisition. The idea of inquisitions wasn't new. The Catholic Church had established inquisitorial courts as early as the 12th century to combat heresy in France and Italy. But what made the Spanish Inquisition unique was that it wasn't directly controlled by the Pope. It was created by the Spanish crown, with papal permission, but firmly under royal control. In 1478, Pope Sixtus IV reluctantly granted Ferdinand and Isabella the authority to establish an inquisition in Castile. At first, it was limited in scope, but by 1483, it expanded dramatically. With the appointment of Tomás de Torquemada as the first Grand Inquisitor. Torquemada was a Dominican friar and a fanatic for religious uniformity. Ironically, he came from a family of conversos himself, which perhaps explains the ferocity of his crusade against suspected insincere converts. Under his leadership, the Inquisition evolved into a highly organized and feared institution. Its methods were shrouded in secrecy. Accusations could be made anonymously. Trials often lacked defense lawyers. Torture, while regulated in theory, was used to extract confessions. The accused were frequently kept in isolation, not even knowing the identity of their accusers. One of the most terrifying spectacles of the Spanish Inquisition was the auto de fe, or act of faith. These were public ceremonies where sentences were pronounced, and punishments, including imprisonment, confiscation of property, penance, and sometimes execution by burning at the stake, were carried out. Though the actual execution was done by civil authorities, the Inquisition orchestrated the spectacle. It's important to understand that not everyone accused was burned. Of the estimated 150,000 people investigated by the Inquisition during its first 50 years, historians believe that between 2,000 and 5,000 were executed. While the numbers are debated, the psychological impact was enormous. The fear of accusation, public shame, and destruction of family reputation was enough to control behavior across society. The Inquisition was also self-financing. Confiscated property from the accused was used to fund its operations, creating a system with a perverse incentive to pursue wealthy suspects. This, combined with deep-rooted social tensions, fueled resentment, especially against the converso population. In 1492, the same year Columbus set sail for the New World, the Catholic monarchs issued the Alhambra Decree, expelling all unconverted Jews from Spain. Historians estimate that between 40,000 and 100,000 Jews left the kingdom, while thousands more converted, many under pressure, and remained. Those who stayed became subject to increasing scrutiny by the Inquisition. One lesser-known aspect of the early Inquisition is how it evolved. While its initial focus was on Jewish conversos, it would later target Moriscos, Protestants, Freemasons, bigamists, and even blasphemers, or those who failed to adhere strictly to Catholic rituals. As Spain expanded its empire, the Inquisition spread with it into the Americas, Italy, and beyond. Contrary to popular belief, the Inquisition did not operate with unlimited power. It faced opposition both within Spain and from abroad. Some monarchs tried to limit its reach. Philosophers of the Enlightenment, like Voltaire and Montesquieu, would later condemn it as a symbol of tyranny and superstition. Even some Spanish clergy questioned its extremism. Still, the Spanish Inquisition endured. It wasn't officially abolished until 1834, more than 350 years after it began. Its legacy is complex, a mixture of fear, religious control, persecution, and political manipulation, but also a reflection of the anxieties of a society undergoing rapid change. So, how did the Spanish Inquisition begin? It wasn't just a story of fanaticism. It was the product of historical forces, the end of Muslim rule, the rise of royal power, fear of the other, and the desire to unify a fragmented land through faith. In the name of purity, it sowed suspicion. In the pursuit of unity, it unleashed division. And in trying to root out heresy, it left behind a long shadow in the history of justice and intolerance. Curious facts about the Spanish Inquisition. Before we close our journey, here are a few curious and lesser-known facts about the Spanish Inquisition. Details that often escape the spotlight of history books, but shed even more light on the strange and complex nature of the institution. First, let's return briefly to the figure of Tomás de Torquemada. Though feared and reviled, He became the personification of the Inquisition's early ferocity. Historians estimate that during his tenure, over 2,000 executions took place under his authority. While numbers vary depending on the source, his name still echoes as a symbol of religious extremism and institutional terror. Second, not all those accused by the Inquisition were hunted down. Some people, in a bizarre twist, actually denounced themselves voluntarily. By admitting to minor offenses or expressing doubt about their faith, they hoped for leniency or sought to protect themselves from harsher, false accusations by neighbors or rivals. Third, the Inquisition left behind a vast and remarkably detailed archive. The inquisitors were meticulous record keepers. Thousands of pages of testimonies, trial minutes, confessions, and verdicts still survive in Spanish archives today. These documents provide historians with invaluable insight into the daily fears, beliefs, language, and even diet of people in 15th and 16th century Spain. Fourth, the Inquisition didn't operate uniformly across Spain. Major cities like Seville, Toledo, and Valladolid were hubs of activity, where tribunals were most active, but rural areas, especially mountainous or remote regions, often experienced far less inquisitorial oversight. Geography sometimes offered a shield. Fifth, in some cases, inquisitors took mental health into account. Rather than executing those who appeared delusional or unstable, certain suspects were declared mentally unfit and instead confined to monasteries or religious hospitals. While far from humane by modern standards, it reveals a surprisingly nuanced layer to inquisitorial judgments. And finally, it's worth noting that despite its infamous reputation, the Spanish Inquisition was not the deadliest of its kind. Other inquisitions, especially in France or during witch trials in Central Europe, sometimes had higher execution counts. What made Spain's version unique was its centralized structure, state sponsorship, and its endurance over centuries. This deeper context reminds us that history is rarely black and white. The Spanish Inquisition was not just an institution of punishment, it was a mirror of fear, identity, and power in a changing world. And even in its darkest corners, there are layers waiting to be uncovered.